Colonel Malachowski, it is so amazing to finally meet you in person. And this morning, offline, you were telling me about this report that you contributed to that got published with the federal government. So can you just start by telling me a little bit about that for everybody listening to this interview?
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Academies of Science actually had a report that was commissioned via the Cohen Foundation. So kudos to the Cohen Foundation. And the report was to look into Lyme infection-associated chronic illnesses and treatments. So to kind of assess the status of current treatments and provide a roadmap forward for the development of treatments to help people with Lyme, what we're calling Lyme IACI, IACI.
So I've heard about the Lyme IACI term, and it's new, I think, for a lot of people listening to this. But before we even talk about Lyme IACI, can you tell us about the word chronic in the report? Because that's something that I think is pretty powerful as well.
Yeah, and so in the report we talk about that term and how it can have different meanings, right, to different peoples based on their perspective. And that's why we kind of thought that the term infection-associated chronic illness is a nice umbrella term, because in a lot of ways we're still trying to get to the root cause of these chronic symptoms. Is it something that's persistent? Is it autoimmune? Is it permanent sequelae? Is it some of the above, all of the above? Is it different for different people? And so this Lyme IACI term is meant to be inclusive of all of those things.
And what's so cool is it's a new term, but we've interviewed people around the world, from Germany and Poland, and they're talking about Lyme IACI. So I don't know how it picked up such traction so quickly, but it's pretty fascinating.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that just prior to the Lyme IACI NASM committee starting, sorry about all the acronyms.
So NASM one more time is what?
National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine.
Nice.
And what people need to know about NASM and why it's important for our community is it is chartered by Congress, and it is known as the collective scientific voice of the United States of America.
Wow.
So this is honestly the first time in history that the government has used the term Lyme infection-associated chronic illness.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the federal government and the authority at the federal government is recognizing chronic Lyme is a huge step. So beyond that, tell us more about the report and what was in it and how you personally contributed to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a year-long committee. Everyone that was on it volunteered their time. It was a heavy lift and a lot of work for everybody that was there. I was the sole patient representative. The other 14 people came from different backgrounds, whether they were clinicians, whether they were research scientists. Some people had a background in Lyme and tick-borne illnesses. Others came to the committee with no real background, which was, I think, beautiful because they came without any preconceived notions. And so they were there to really just learn and offer their, experience and wisdom from whatever their subject matter expertise was.
Yeah, it sounds like you're being pretty positive, but was it a challenge for you to get them up to speed about the reality of Lyme disease? People hear Lyme and they think, oh, my cousin had Lyme and antibiotics cured them. So was that a challenge for you with this committee, and especially considering they weren't Lyme aware?
I think as the sole patient advocate, there were days that I felt like it was a pretty darn heavy lift. But I think what was good about it is they were asking me questions and that they were wanting to learn and that I was able to voice my concerns. And I was able to say, well, here's why patients disagree, and that it was, respected. And so in a lot of ways, we educated a whole new group of people. And by the end of it, some of these folks were like, dang, this is something I'm really interested in now, just scientifically.
So you influenced over a dozen high-level people that report to the federal government to learn about chronic Lyme. So never mind this report, but you've now influenced these people to be more Lyme aware, to bring it to the next level, hopefully down the road. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's go back again. So this report, when was it published? And give us some detail about what's in it and what that means for us.
Absolutely. So the report was actually published in May in conjunction with Lyme disease and tick-borne illness awareness month. And people can find it online. All you have to do is Google NASM Lyme report and it'll bring it up. And if like a lot of us, we can't read a 180-page report, they have a summary available. There's also the abstract, like there are with most scientific publications. But really, it talks about the current state of affairs, right? Which is the complexity. It even touches on the controversy. I think one of the most important things this report does is really center the patient voice. And so we're basically looking at what is the current state of our understanding of the chronic symptoms following a Lyme disease diagnosis, and where would we like to go, right? What would patients like to see? And it actually has several distinct recommendations that we have for the federal government as well as partners, whether those partners are in academic research, whether they're in nonprofit and patient advocacy work, and how everybody could come together. So we use the term a roadmap, and that's really what it is. And it can get complicated with these 180-page reports and all of that, but I think the one thing I want the patient community to understand is the National Academies of Science, and I want to make sure that they're not government employees. The National Academies of Science is meant to represent, the whole entire ecosystem, right?
Yep.
And it's the collective voice of science of the United States of America, for the collective voice of science to say Lyme infection-associated chronic illness is real,
yes,
and we need to do something about it. And I think one of the main points was, we've spent the past few decades trying to find, the root cause or that specific biomarker for a cure, which is important, and those efforts need to continue onward.
Absolutely.
But what we're saying is, in parallel, people are suffering. People have been suffering, and we need to do something about that now.
Right.
No more waiting. So is there a way to look at treatments in parallel to these kind of biomarker type discoveries? And this report says yes, and we should.
So from the top down, they're recognizing that we know what we know, but there's also a lot we don't know.
Absolutely.
And there's recommendations that are in this large report. So what are some of the recommendations and steps forward? Because we've made a lot of progress over the last decade. You and I know that.
Yeah.
But what are these recommendations, and where do you see the Lyme community being down the road?
So several recommendations are in there. There's kind of two that stand out that I'd like to highlight. One is centering the patients, right? When we do these clinical trials, this idea that patients must be involved from step one, from trial design through execution, and also be part of the reporting out process, right? And also how the patient community is an undertapped resource as far as biobanks, as far as surveys, as far as, again, clinical trial design. So that recommendation comes out clearly. I think the other one that's really important, and you started to allude to it earlier, where did this Lyme IACI term come from? Well, we were getting this attention, I think, and this term is coming from the suffering of the long COVID community, right? Long COVID came along, and it's on such a massive scale, and it was, just so in the limelight, no pun intended, that it's an umbrella term, and we're realizing we need to join forces. We need to collaborate. There may be things that are translational, between long COVID. Let's look at the MECFS community. Where are things where we can share resources, share, that there's so much overlap. And so this idea that as researchers, policymakers, government entities move forward, this umbrella that should come over us. So infection-associated chronic illness, we know, that MS can come from an EBV infection, and so I think there's a lot more recognition that this is real, not just for Lyme and tick-borne illness, for a lot of other bacteria, viruses, and parasites.
But I also think that the term chronic Lyme over the last several decades is so controversial. So the fact that our community in the world has adopted Lyme IACI so quickly, and it's less controversial, is huge, because A, it's less controversial, B, it's being accepted by the federal government from the top down, but C, to your point, we're also being able to get other communities on board. Absolutely. Because it's not just Borrelia, which we know it never is just Borrelia, so this term is a much better term for our community.
Wouldn't it be great if all of these illnesses and diseases had unlimited resources, but that's not how it works, right? And so the ability to pull alongside each other, to share, to translate that medicine, I think is going to be beneficial to all of us.
And even from the patient community standpoint, if we can partner up with the chronic fatigue syndrome, the fibromyalgia people, the long COVID people, because I do believe a lot of what are helping various people in other groups that have these identities can help the Lyme community. So if we share our knowledge and we pool our resources, a lot of what helped me in my journey will help people with other conditions that aren't labeled Lyme disease currently.
Absolutely, and isn't that what we want?
Yes.
When you look at this NASM Lyme report, it talks a lot about the overlap of these illnesses, and it also talks a lot about that it's not just Borrelia. It talks about we really need to look into co-infections, and is that cohort of people who have multiple tick-borne illnesses different than someone who is diagnosed in the acute Lyme phase? I think the patient community knows that, but what we need is for science to catch up. And I think what this report does is say that science needs to be there to bridge the gap.
Yes.
We have to acknowledge the patient experience and what the patients have to offer to this research and bring the science to bridge that gap. And the term chronic, right? I as a patient, probably like you, I always chuckle because the reason it's been controversial is it depends on the cohort that's describing it.
Yep.
When we as patients say chronic Lyme, we're talking about chronic symptoms. Oftentimes we're talking about the idea of persistence in a chronic infection. Then you have scientists and researchers who go, well, have we proven persistence or not? And so what the report wanted to do was cast the net wide and say it may be all of these things.
Absolutely.
And let's not exclude any of these ideas.
It could be all of the above, to your point. It could be a mixed bag, right? And until we know, we can't say definitively that's not the case.
And it may be different for different people, And I think so by saying infection-associated chronic illness,
I love that.
we're touching on the entire tick-borne illness community experience, but we're also touching on these other communities that we can partner with.
So give us a little bit more hope before we conclude this, because with technology and artificial intelligence and everybody working on with the funding we're getting, better testing and better treatment, tell us some cool things that you're aware of that are coming down the pike in a variety of areas with people in the community.
I'm so glad you brought this up because we touch on that in the report as well, and including some of the recommendations is just the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. When you think about some of these biobanks, when you think about some of the patient data sets that are out there in the surveys that haven't been...
LymeDisease.org has a brilliant database, a patient-driven database.
You bet. And they're actually in our report. And so the ability for machine learning to go through and look at that, or the ability maybe to look at pre-existing medications that have never been tried for Lyme disease and have a machine go into that. I mean, the amount of research that's coming out daily in long COVID and ME/CFS and Lyme is just increasing exponentially to the point that an individual researcher can't keep up with that. But AI and machine learning can help us do that. And so I think that there is a lot of hope for us to look at development of treatments that work for us to just accelerate. And I'm excited. It's going to happen in our lifetime.
It will, absolutely.
It's going to happen in our lifetime.
Yes.
And the other thing too is we've spent so much time over the last few decades looking for that biomarker, for that cure, while ignoring the people who are suffering. So this report wants to, again, say we need to do both. We can look at treatments before we know the biomarker, but isn't that a cool idea? What if we discover treatments that work for a large cohort of people, and we can work that backwards? What is the causal reason that it's working? Oh my gosh, that's the biomarker.
Yes.
Isn't that mind-blowing?
It is wild. And I'm so sorry, Colonel Malachowski, that you had to go through this experience. But we are so grateful for you and our community because you have done so much. And without you, we wouldn't be where we are today.
All
Sincerely,
of us together.
All of us together, but you really have risen. And you are advocating from the top down. I mean, you served on this committee that you just talked about to generate this report, which is probably the biggest news that's happened, ever with the federal government recognizing this chronic Lyme disease, which I won't use because it's controversial.
Lyme IACI, infection-associated chronic illness.
So, I'm happy to be in this fight with you, and I know that in the near future we're going to have a much better place for people that get sick from Lyme disease. So I can't thank you enough for having a chat with us, and I have to recognize that we're sitting here right now at Project LabCoat. We're about to walk at New York Fashion Week as Lyme advocates and leaders in the Lyme space to raise awareness of Lyme disease. I mean, if that doesn't tell you that the mainstream media and the mainstream world has accepted the severity of Lyme disease, then what will? The fact that we're here tonight is amazing.
It's amazing. The vector's in the right direction, and now we have momentum. So let's go walk that runway.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.